Welcome to another edition of the Batchelor News Network and the Batchelor News Report. I'm LA Batchelor. Thank you for joining us wherever you are. We certainly appreciate you being a part of this. Before we get to our guest, please do subscribe to our YouTube page. Just go to Pat Nation 1 at YouTube or just Google LA Batchelor YouTube. Subscribe so you can continue to find out the guests, the things that we do, the updates, the breaking news, the discussions that we have. You can also go to Facebook at Pat Nation to subscribe to our Facebook page. Hit that like button to be one of the many that are subscribing to our page. You also download and subscribe and join at other social media outlets that we have. I want to bring in my guest, of course, of Onassis Media. Always a pleasure to have him on. He is Nick Onassis. And Nick, always a pleasure, my friend. Been a minute.
I'm good, LA. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Good. And for those who are watching, if you see me blinking a lot, it is allergy season, and it's been pretty rough for me lately. But I digress. Nick, I have to start with my Pittsburgh Steelers. Lately, I call them the Squealers. Really, you can go back to 2016 if you're talking about, playoff wins and things of that nature. I text you when it was official that Aaron Rodgers was going to be the next starter, and he will be the starter of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And a couple of things. I'm going to defend Aaron Rodgers in one regard. Having played the sport and knowing how many camps go and OTAs and things of that nature. It's been a lot said about the fact that, well, if the Steelers and Rodgers knew they were a fit and they knew back in March that, it was he was going to be the quarterback, why not come out then? And again, high school, college, pro, we played the sport, getting to know people via Zoom or whatever verbally is different than practice. And the man had some things going on. He got married, had some people that needed his help personally, family, whatever. And so that just didn't happen. He missed the camp that is voluntary. And how many vets Nick, Tom Brady or otherwise, that really go into the camps that have that kind of experience. They want to be there for voluntary. They want to get to know the players. Football is football. The cadence, the language might be different. But you can go in a class and learn that. So I think that was really unfair of the media and some people saying that he should have, reported or they should have announced it a few months ago. Having said that, my issue with Aaron Rodgers is not that he can't throw the ball. In my lifetime, and I'm older than you, Nick, it's two quarterbacks that I thought that can throw the ball, that are very accurate, that can just zip it like anybody else, no one else, I should say. And that is my all-time favorite, Dan Marino, and Aaron Rodgers. So the throwing the ball and the understanding the game and everything and getting rid of the ball. He don't turn the ball over a lot. I get that. My question goes way back to Green Bay when he left and when he went to the Jets. When he says he's all in with Pittsburgh, is he really? He's a quirky guy taking sabbaticals in the mountains and doing things and all these side things during the season. Is a concern if you're a Steeler fan that is realistic and honest about it. And so that's my concern. So what's your thoughts about him signing with Pittsburgh, number one? And number two, what's the ceiling with this guy, if nothing else, if he's only going to be there for 1 year?
I think he's an upgrade over Mason Rudolph in the short term, at least. I think the ceiling is probably what he did last year through 17 games with the Jets, which was a little shy of 3,900 yards, 28 touchdowns. I think that he is a professional when it's all said and done. The reason for the delay, I think, was because he wasn't sure whether or not he was at the end of the road. And apparently he does still feel like he's got something to offer, but more importantly, I think he does still want to play. Otherwise, again, he would have walked away. Now, the $19 million contract may have had something to do with that, but when you're already worth northwards of $100 million or whatever it is, I don't think that was as big of a factor as some people may think. But to answer your question directly, I think now that he is signed, I think you'll get a max effort. I can't recall any situation where he didn't put the team first, whether that was in Green Bay or with the Jets. There were times last year when it was clear that the Jets were not going to be a playoff team. Things weren't going well. He could have fabricated an injury or exaggerated a circumstance or whatever to get him out of the lineup and save some of the wear and tear on his body. But he didn't do that. He played, as I said, the entire season last year for a losing team, and I think that does say something about a guy who's 39 years old. So I'm going to give Rodgers the benefit of the doubt. Once he is committed, that he stays committed. And I think that's the scenario here with Pittsburgh.
Yeah, team million, a lot of incentives in that. I think it was 10.5 or 13.5, whatever the case may be. I think the Steelers got a bargain in terms of the financial side for 1 year for a guy like him. I guess let me rearrange the question in terms of the ceiling. How far can the Steelers go? At the very least, if you're a Steeler fan who, and Mike Tomlin won 10 games with, Justin Fields, who they benched, which I thought they should have never done. He really should have still been in Pittsburgh. And of course, Russell Wilson, he won 10 games and they made the playoffs. They didn't finish the way they wanted to. They didn't win, of course, one and done. But with Rodgers there, can they at least win a playoff game?
That's a good question, and I think that's not necessarily directly related to Rodgers. Again, I think I said earlier he's an upgrade over Mason Rudolph. I think he's probably an upgrade over 2024 Russell Wilson and 2024 Justin Fields. He has a veteran presence. At this stage in his career, he's not a gunslinger, but more of a game manager. And I think Mike Tomlin has proven he can win with game managers. The rest of the AFC is tough and will be tough again. So the fact that Tomlin was able to get them into the playoffs last year exceeded my expectations. They still have a pretty good defense, borderline top 10. I think that running game improved just via the draft alone. The Johnson kid, I think, looks pretty good. Had a great year last year as a junior in Iowa. He fits the zone blocking scheme.
Bringing Cantwell over from Philly is good, I think, too.
Yep, Gainwell has always been underrated, a good change of pace guy, a good guy on third down to get involved in the pass game. So they've got options in the backfield, the run game. That O-line is above average. And as we talked about, the defense year in and year out is usually a top 10 unit. So the ingredients are there. Not to mention the bona fides that Tomlin himself brings on the sideline. You could pencil in a game and a half, 2 games just on him. So, yeah, I think they're in good shape. They're definitely a playoff contender. Are they good enough to break through into the top 4 in the AFC? I'm not sure. And again,
But at least, but Nick, can they at least win a wild? If they're in a wild card run, can they at least just beat? Can they beat? And I'll get into some of the teams. But if they play like a Houston, can they at least win a wild card game?
Well, if they do, that would put them into the top 4 in the conference.
Right.
And again, I'm just not sure that they're there yet. They may need another piece at some point on the offensive side of the ball. They're probably neck and neck with Houston. I think there's a little bit of a gap between the top 3 and everyone else. The top 3 in the AFC being Kansas City, Buffalo, and Baltimore. I think they're probably in their own tier, to be honest. But yeah, can they climb the ladder and beat a Houston in the playoffs? Probably, but definitely possibly. But again, I think that they're probably about as good, if not a little better than last year. And we'll see. Obviously, a lot unfolds over the course of the year, whether it's injuries, whether it's teams underperforming, teams overperforming. So the landscape in the summer is a lot different than the landscape is in December, just from the nature of football. But right now, yeah, they're in, I think, that second tier in the AFC, that 5 through 8, 5 through 9 group. Is Rodgers enough to put them into the top 4 remains to be seen.
Talking with Nick Anastas from Anastas Media on the Batchelor News Report here on the Batchelor News Network. And Nick, so a couple of things. It's just to stay on that. Do they get TJ Watt signed? I think they do, but I want to ask the question. He, of course, not in mandatory camp right now. Wants to get up there with the Garretts we see what's going on with Hendrickson in Cincinnati. They're the same age. Do they get him signed? And what pieces do they need? Because you said, I think Rodgers will do his part. The rest of the team and everything else is to be seen. So what else do they need? I think they let a Pickens go. So I think they got to get another wide receiver, a bona fide number 2. Defensively in that secondary is still some questions. I know they got Slade and they got Joey Porter Jr. at the corners and stuff. Slade may play safety at some point. We'll see. But what pieces do they need to jump up to that at least elite 4?
I think you highlighted it. 1, get Watt back, keep him healthy. He was healthy last year. He was productive. He's probably at the peak of his career at age 30, 31, whatever it is. So that's the first order of business. Second, you've got to see what you have with that receiver core. Now that the alpha dog is out of the room in Pickens, who fills that void? And again, they don't necessarily need a downfield guy, in my opinion. Can they get a chain mover? Can they get some presence in the slot? In my opinion, they never quite replaced a guy like Hines Ward, who was perennially underrated. Not just catching balls, but blocking downfield. Right. He brought a physical presence. He was a locker room leader, a somewhat magnetic personality, and the guy to go to when things were tight. And since he left, a long time ago now, I don't think that they've quite replaced him on the field or in the locker room. So amongst the receivers that they have, who is going to become the top option? That's a big open question. And then you highlighted it. I think the first 2 levels defensively are pretty darn good. When you factor in the edge, when you factor in the second level with the linebacker core, led by Patrick Queen. But Minkah Fitzpatrick used to be a difference maker in his prime. He's a little seasoned now, not quite as productive as he was early on. So you already highlighted it. I think, the question marks on the perimeter need to be answered in the offensive game, the passing game. And secondly, that secondary does need to either step up or add another piece because, frankly, the defense was on the field too long last year, especially late in the year. they held up, and then finally broke in some of those fourth quarters because they were just on the field too long. So, can you get another stud out of the secondary like Fitzpatrick was a few years ago, to reduce some of the snaps overall for that defensive unit? I think those are the two big questions, and you highlighted it perfectly on the intro.
Yeah, Minka at 29, I think if at one point teams weren't throwing on his side, and now he's had some injuries and things, so it's some combinations going on with that. I agree with you that he can be better. I think Derek Harmon coming over on the defensive line, which was a concern, because as good as the defense tried to hold up, they got gashed in the running game last 5-6 games of the year, including the playoffs against the Ravens. So getting Young to help out a Haber who's on a downside of his career, getting the Derek Harmon, a big, bulky, take up space type of defensive guy, helps. Let me ask you this, because you mentioned, and I agree with you. It's Kansas City, which I'm going to get to them. The Bills and Baltimore, you could flip flop any of those. I agree. So let me just throw some teams out, and you tell me if you think they can beat them if they met them in the playoffs. Number one, I mentioned the Texans. Obviously, their quarterback got some soreness, so he's not going to be in the OTAs at mandatory camp. That offensive line with Houston is taking a step back. He got sacked a lot last year. And Stroud, can they beat the Texans in the playoff game?
Yeah, I would put them about in that same tier. I like what Houston did in the draft. Frankly, they to me were one of the better teams to go out and address needs. I think Jaden Higgins in the second round was a good pick. He's a big, long perimeter receiver. That's what they need opposite Nico Collins. So that I think he helps them right away in the pass game. They've got two new linemen up front. To your point, Cam Robinson has always been solid. Laken Tomlinson is a veteran. So if those guys are healthy, that upgrades both the run game and the pass game. And then you've got another year of development for Stroud, who, has been good. I mean, he was outstanding as a rookie, took a little bit of a step back last year, a little bit of a sophomore slump numbers-wise, but at the end of the day, again, he had them
in the playoffs.
Yeah, not only in the playoffs, but in the Final Four in the AFC, the divisional round, so to speak, for the second straight year. And Houston's a franchise that has not had sustained success even year to year over their now 2 decades of existence. So I think they're doing the right things, at least offensively. And then defensively, we'll see. Al Shazier is supposed to be their top linebacker. He missed about half the year last year. So if he's healthy and back to form, that's a difference maker, I think, at the second level. They brought in C.J. Gardner-Johnston, who seems like he's been in the league forever, but still productive at strong safety. So, yeah, they're in that group, and I think they did improve, at least at the top part of the draft back in April. So they're going to be tough again and probably the favorites in the AFC South.
Cincinnati. A lot to be said. Listen, I'm not just saying that because they're in the division. I'm a Steelers fan. But this team has always been, going back to Paul Brown, who, of course, as you know, you're a historian of it, who started the Bengals. They've always been kind of cheap, and they've always been kind of dysfunctional. I think people pick on the likes of the Jets and even the Giants and some other team. The Bengals have been dysfunctional. They just happen to have a franchise quarterback that got them on the map. He's so good, he can will them to wins. But and a lot has been said is Baltimore, Cincinnati, then Pittsburgh, then Cleveland. But can they beat the Bengals if the Bengals make the playoffs?
The Bengals are going to have to outshoot people, I think. And, that works sometimes. Sometimes it doesn't. I think Zach Taylor's probably on the hot seat.
He
If
should
they,
be.
yeah, if they get off to a slow start, I think he's in trouble. If he gets them back to the playoffs, he's probably fine. But, offensively, they're going to put up points again. As long as Burrow's in there, he is a top 3 or 4 quarterback in the league.
Yeah.
And still getting better, as scary as that may be. The perimeter weapons between Higgins and Jamar Chase are as good as it gets. They've got a big body in the slot who's underappreciated in Yoshevich. And, that ground game was surprisingly pretty good as well with Chase Brown, who kind of came out of nowhere. I think that's more of a question mark than anything else. Can he do a repeat performance of last year, being a former 5th-round pick and kind of a no-name? So offensively, again, I think they put up points. The bigger concern is probably defensively, where they did spend some draft capital and are hoping for some immediate results with those rookies. Shamar Stewart was a pretty good pick on the edge in the first round. In the second round, they followed that up with a weak side linebacker named Demetrius Knight. So the question is, does the influx of that young talent on the defensive side of the ball make an immediate contribution, or does that take time to pan out?
But they're dysfunctional though, Nick, because you mentioned Stewart, who by all accounts, 17th pick in the draft, Texas A&M, they're nickel and dime this kid. The standard is the standard with rookies coming in with these, making guarantees and things. They're trying to take those away. A guy who not only could be on the other side of Hendrickson, rushing the passer, or B, they let Hendrickson go in a few years, and this is your guy who's replacing him. They can't get both of them signed. And that's an issue. That's why I said, as good as the offense can be, can Pittsburgh take advantage of that if they met in the playoffs?
Yeah, I think so, because then it becomes a contrast of styles. Ground and pound versus air it out. And typically in January, ground and pound wins. To put it as simply as I possibly can. In a hypothetical matchup, let's say, it doesn't matter where it is. It's going to be outdoors. It's going to be cold, whether it's Pittsburgh or Cincinnati. And I think the Steelers are probably better constructed to win in an environment like that. So, yeah, in a hypothetical matchup, I think Pittsburgh probably would have the upper hand in that kind of a scenario. As far as the front office goes, I agree with you. The rookie contract thing is always kind of a touchy thing to navigate in this day and age with bonuses and that kind of thing. Certain players can catch feelings on it. It can become a distraction, and hopefully in Cincinnati's case that doesn't prove to be true. But yeah, Hendrickson deserves probably to be paid, even though, again, it seems like the way things are is you're not getting paid for what you've done, but you're getting paid for what you potentially can do. And how much or how many more seasons of elite production can they get out of Hendrickson, who's 29, 30 years old? So, yeah, they were looking to the future with that first-round pick for sure. And I agree with you. It's probably in their best interest organizationally to keep that guy happy from the get-go to avoid any further problems down the road.
Talk masses here on the show. Denver. Notoriously, historically, the Steelers have had issues in playing the Broncos, especially in Mile High. The Broncos coming off a playoff appearance, albeit a short one and done as well. But can they beat the Broncos?
I think that depends on how good Bo Nix is. Now, obviously, he exceeded a lot of expectations as a rookie, but we've seen this before where a rookie makes a big splash and then takes a little bit of a step back in year number 2. That's just the way, things seem to work out sometimes at the position. So if let's take let's take the idea that he does improve, that he is as good as last year, if not better, then yeah, they're going to be tough. Um, the longer that coaching staff is there under Sean Payton, the more the team starts to reflect Sean Payton. So we'll see about the ground game. The ground game should be new. Obviously, they just signed J.K. Dobbins, who has an unbelievably tough injury history, undersized. I'm not sure if he plays 17 games. In fact, I tend to doubt it. They brought in another smaller bodied back in R.J. Harvey. They really targeted him. They went up to get him in round number 2. So that could be a pretty good speedy 1-2 punch. If, again, injury, doesn't rear its ugly head, I think they're in pretty good shape with that ground game behind one of the better offensive lines in the conference. And then it's kind of the same thing that we just talked about with Cincinnati. How good is that defense going to be?
I mean, they got the current defensive player of the year, so that helps.
Yeah. We'll see again if there's a repeat performance there. They're bringing a ton of guys back from injury, including Dre Greenlaw, who they signed from San Francisco. He hasn't been healthy in 2 or 3 years, but he's still young enough where he may be able to go back to 2022 levels. And if so, then that's a difference maker at the second level. Alex Singleton, who was a tackling machine, but is on the older end at now 32 years old with a history of knee troubles. Big question mark there. But again, if he's healthy, he's an anchor in the middle of that 3-4 along with Greenlaw. And then Hufanga, again, he was an all-pro, 2 years ago with San Francisco before he got injured.
Right.
So there's veteran pieces with injury history on that side of the football. And that, I think, is their biggest question, not just defensively, but overall.
Yeah, and I think Greenlaw, if he plays like you said, I agree. If he plays like he played in San Fran, he's a tackling machine. If he plays like that, they're going to be a tough out. And I want to get back to the AFC West in just a bit. But staying with it, you talked about great coaches and Sean Payton and the Broncos and their identity or his identity. Same thing with Jim Harbaugh. And listen, Harbaugh is one we know everywhere he's gone. Been to a Super Bowl with the 49ers. He won at Michigan. Finally, they get over the hump. And the only thing, and I'm asking about this team again versus Pittsburgh in the playoffs. The only thing is Herbert's got to show me something, man. And I think with Harbaugh, eventually the mistakes, going through a better job and his progress, because he was god awful against the Texans last year, and it wasn't all his fault because defensively, Bosa and those guys didn't really get after Stroud and stuff, but he was really bad. So if the Steelers and those team and the Chargers play, who do you think has a chance to win?
I'm going to defend Herbert for just a minute, not because I'm some big fan or whatever, but I tend to give guys the benefit of the doubt. I don't think he was anywhere near 100% last year. He had a lingering foot injury that occurred in the early part of the year that never really went away, in my opinion. And a foot injury is one of those injuries that doesn't get a lot of attention. When you compare it to a knee or a shoulder or an elbow.
Right, he's got to step into his throw. I agree with you.
Yeah. So I think now a year removed from that injury, I think mechanically he'll look more like he did a few years ago. Again, still on the younger side, on the right side of 30, so to speak. Has physical tools, has experience at this point. The excuses are out now if he doesn't perform, but I tend to think that he will, just because he's, again, a year away from that injury. Frankly, LA, I didn't know we were going to get into predictions, but since we are, I think I keep calling them San Diego. It's just an old habit, but the Chargers, to me, are probably that fourth team in the AFC. Okay. I really like what they did in the draft, especially at the top end. I think Omarion Hampton is going to be a star at the running back spot. I think that's an immediate upgrade there. Although Dobbins was productive in the 13 games he did play last year, but Hampton's just a different beast, in my opinion. And I think he helps them right away. I think Najee Harris becomes kind of an afterthought, kind of a compliment earlier as opposed to later in the season. That offensive line is still pretty good. McConkey is a perfect slot guy, a chain mover, as we talked about, that's important out of the slot. And then, defensively, we'll see. Again, I think they probably could have actually done a little bit more there. They bring in Dante Johnson at the corner spot. Derwin James is still one of the most underappreciated safeties in the league.
He's a nasty physical dude, man.
I mean, every game he's just balling out.
Yeah.
Whether it shows up on the box score or not, he's a difference maker, a chess piece, so to speak, that you can move around. They lose Joey Bosa, but frankly, Bosa hasn't been a factor in a long time.
Stayed injured the last couple of years, just like his brother, quite frankly.
Right. And he's a couple of years older than his brother as well. So
right.
So that doesn't bode well. But again, they let him walk, I think, for a reason. And I think, frankly, Buffalo probably overpaid for him.
Yeah.
But we'll see. That being said, outside of Derwin James, I forgot about the kid at the second level, Dayon Henley is a blossoming star as well. Quietly put up 120 plus tackles last year in year number 2. Only 25 years old. I think that was a steal of a pick a few years ago under the old regime. I think he becomes probably a Pro Bowler this year. Can they get enough pressure? Can they get enough of a pass rush?
Good question.
Khalil Mack is still there, but he's 90 years old at this point.
Right.
Took a step back last year in production. Not sure how much gas he has left in the tank. So their big concern, I think, is can they generate enough of a pass rush? You already alluded to it last year. That hurt them in the playoff game against Stroud and the Texans. And they didn't do enough, frankly, in the offseason to address that, in my opinion. So that's their weak spot. But outside of that, great coach, great offense. Maybe not a great offense, but certainly an above average, productive offense.
Yeah.
With a couple of difference makers on defense. I think they're good enough to win, 10, 11, maybe even 12 games.
Wow.
And certainly good enough, I think, to get into that second round.
Talking to Nick Anastas here on the Batchelor News Report. Nick, if you got them in the top 4, that means that's them and Kansas City in the AFC West. And before the draft, we talked about the concerns with Kansas City and clearly on the offensive line. I think they addressed it. I think their offensive line, look, 15 just needs time to throw. You saw in the Super Bowl, he had no time. They were all over him. And I think they addressed a lot of it on the offensive line. They got better on the defensive side, defensive line specifically. Do you think the Chargers win that division, or Kansas City still the team to beat in that division?
It's still the Chiefs. I mean, I don't see any reason not to pick the Chiefs. I'd be a madman to bet against Andy Reid. That was probably the most predictable pick of the entire first round, was that the Chiefs are going to take a tackle. And we'll see how good Josh Simmons is going to be right away. He's penciled in at the starter at the left tackle spot right now. So, again, I just don't see any reason to doubt them. They were more conservative last year, I think, by need more than anything else.
Right.
They were typically a bottom 10 team in terms of rushing attempts per game historically under Andy Reid. And then last year they jump into the top 5 in terms of carries per game. I think they go back somewhere to the middle. You'll see a little more balance. Part of that is because the weaponry, so to speak, the perimeter pieces, the receiving core should be healthy right away. You get a second year out of Xander Worthy. I think that's only going to be good. But the main piece is Rashee Rice. Back for a full year out of the slot. If he's on the field for 17 games, he makes them much more dynamic. He's a chain mover on third down. say what you want about Travis Kelce. He's kind of taken a back seat, I think, in the pass game at this point, which is okay as long as Rashee Rice is there to pick up the slack. So I agree with you. They upgrade the offensive line. They have now a healthy complement of wide receivers. Obviously, number 15 is still in his prime. And defensively, they were, right where they needed to be last year, good enough to win the AFC. And that's basically the same unit back again. They re-signed Nick Bolton for big money to keep him there.
Which I thought was smart.
Yep, was smart. He's not going to be an all-pro, but he is definitely
he still can cover. He still can play that. He still can play safety.
Exactly. He's a three down linebacker, which is important. And then they signed, the only real splash they made, if you want to call it a splash, is Kristen Fulton, the cornerback, coming over from a division rival in the Chargers. I think he fits nicely right away. Pretty good against the run, pretty good against the pass. So again, this is a team that went 16-1 in the regular season. I mean, they fell apart against a superior, more physical Philadelphia team in the Super Bowl, but they didn't need to blow anything up. They just needed to tweak it, so to speak, and I think that's what they did.
Yeah. Just one other with it as regards to going back to the AFC North. Is this a make or break? Certainly, they're not going to get rid of him. But is this a put up or shut up for Lamar Jackson?
I would not go that far, no. Because he's done nothing but perform. If he had a mediocre year last year, then I would probably agree with you. But he was outstanding last year. Certainly could have been the MVP again. It went to Josh Allen, I think, just because the Bills won 2 more games than the Ravens. Can he stay healthy? Still a little undersized, still exposes himself on some of those design runs. Can Harbaugh and company put him in a position to not only succeed, but to keep him consistently on the field? And again, he was 100% last year, went the whole distance, but that's not guaranteed, as we know, at the position, especially for a run-heavy quarterback. So,
but Nick, not to cut you off, I've been critical of Josh Allen. I know you love Josh Allen, and I've been critical, but Josh has beaten Pat Mahomes. Josh has gone deeper than Lamar. So when are we going to start saying, okay, Lamar, I mean, what is he, 4th in passer rating all time or whatever, 3 or whatever? I get that and all the numbers and the MVPs, I get it. But fumbling the ball in the playoffs last year, like, here we go again. Like, is he – I mean, what is it going to take for him to get at least to me, to Josh Allen, where Josh Allen's is won on the road, Josh Allen's is beaten – won some more game. What is it going to take for him to at least, because I think it's Mahomes, Allen, and Lamar.
What it's going to take is a head-to-head win in the playoffs.
Right.
It's that simple. You already outlined it. They were close last year in Buffalo. If we remember right, there was a drop pass at the goal line by the tight end.
By his famous tight end who, oh my God. But he fumbled the ball. He threw a bad pick. I mean,
yeah, all that's legit. All that's legit. But at the same time, you got to give him credit for putting them in that position to begin with. And if you think you're going to upgrade over Lamar Jackson, you better think again.
Right.
So they're married till death do us part, so to speak, for better or worse, however you want to phrase it. He is the franchise moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think and him, unlike Pittsburgh, he and John Harbaugh are tied to the hip. So I just feel like something, and I know how you felt when I asked you about John Harbaugh, because Mike Tomlin's under the pressure, and you said, no, Harbaugh, I don't see anything that, any movement there. But both of them, it's put up or shut up. Like they gotta, I'm not a big fan of the coach in Buffalo, but I would give more credit to Josh Allen than the coach. But with Baltimore, it just seems like both John Harbaugh and Lamar Jackson, they gotta win. This is the year for them to get to the AFC Championship game and perform well, even if they lose. They got to get over the hump. These turnovers and the bad calls and things. It just seems like they're more on the hot seat than Buffalo is at this point.
Potentially, but I don't see either one of them, barring a complete collapse, being on the quote unquote hot seat. I just don't, because of what I said earlier. You're not going to upgrade the position, no matter what you do. So, again, they could be a Cincinnati, a good year here or there, but mostly dysfunctional. They could be a San Diego who, feels like they've made an accomplishment by just making the playoffs, or any of these other mediocre franchises. What has set them apart is the sustained success, whether it's regular season, whether it's playoff appearances, whether it's a postseason win here or there, whether it's a number one seed or whatever. They've gotten the job done way more often than not.
Right.
So unless, again, there's some kind of a collapse where, they go 8-9 or 7-10 and don't even sniff the playoffs, then I think the heat really turns up. But if they're back in the playoffs again, if they lose in the second round or whatever, I think they just go back to square one next summer and nothing else happens, in my opinion, because, again, they've had the track record of at least getting them into that top tier and being competitive year in and year out. And that says something.
I think, too, with them this year in particular, it's the Ravens and then it's everybody else in the AFC North. Whoever, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, whatever, it's the Ravens. So that automatically puts them in the top four. And I'm not diminishing it. I'm just saying that it's almost like the Patriots to a lesser degree. The Patriots had a bad Jets team, Dolphins in and out in that division, and but they won because they were the better team, and then you got the other three teams fighting for second and everything else. But that automatically winning the AFC North puts them in that Final Four. Speaking of the Patriots, listen, I'm a players guy, and I know you're a players guy. Get the money. Players are making millions, and the owners are making billions. And I've defended Steph Diggs, but he wore out his welcome in Minnesota. We made an excuse that some people have for him there. He goes to Buffalo, and he wants out. He can't work with Josh Allen anymore. Now he comes back and goes to Houston. Now he comes back to the AFC East, comes to the Patriots, and what in the hell sandwich is he doing? Like, what? I don't understand the whole notion of what he had, the powder and all this other stuff. But at this point, what are the Patriots saying? What is going to happen at this point with Steph Diggs? Because, healthy, he should be the best wide receiver on the team. And with a young quarterback, you need that 3rd and 8 guy that's going to go get it, or a 50-50 ball, or a guy like that that's a veteran, that's tough, that can make the catches. So at this point, what are the Patriots doing with him?
The incident seems like it's being handled in-house, which I think, to Mike Vrabel's credit, that's probably the way to handle it. You already have enough of a distraction. The media has picked up on the story and run with it. To kind of feed into that with a war of words, so to speak, would be a mistake. So I think Vrabel handled it about as best that anybody can handle that kind of a bad situation. They said that they spoke behind closed doors, and any potential, if any, discipline is going to be handled again inside. That being said, he's got to exercise some better judgment than that.
Yeah.
And at 30 years old, he should know better. The whole Cardi B crowd and all that's just not going to help win football games, in my opinion, especially coming to a new team. He should have been at the OTAs. throwing on the side bare minimum with Drake May, developing that chemistry early on,
Right.
introducing himself to his teammates, and just putting in extra work because he's quote unquote the new guy in town. Instead, and again, players are allowed to do what they want, on their own time. I get all of that, but just to put it simply, not a good look at all what we saw in that video. And hopefully there's a lesson learned here moving forward.
But let me just say, just to play advocate, if the guy is dating a Cardi B, there's some entertainment and entourage and stuff that comes with that world,
Right.
And again, I'm not going to go as far as say he's a malcontent, but what you knew what happened, or you heard what happened in Minnesota. You saw what happened in Buffalo, your own division. Should they have done a better job in, buyers beware, like understanding who this guy is? And like you said, at 30 years old, he's been in the league long enough, and he should use better judgment. Should the Patriots have done a better job in kind of vetting this guy before they actually brought him in?
Potentially. I mean, I'm sure that there was an interview or whatever, but as far as I know, he's been pretty clean off the field. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's been any off-field incidents besides this in his past.
No.
So, you can. There's always two sides to a story in terms of wanting to leave or whatever. Keep in mind, he was traded from both the Vikings and the Bills.
Right.
So that's that can be interpreted a number of different ways, whether it's the organization, looking down the road, and
they said he's not a locker room guy, though. So even just from that standpoint, but of course they said that they had issues. People had issues with Randy Moss and things, but not to this extent. So even if the Cardi B stuff didn't happen, that this situation didn't happen, he's been traded twice for a reason. It could be the organization. You're right. You absolutely right. But he's been traded twice. So, something's going on.
Sure. But at the end of the day, he's still productive. And
right.
that includes the 7 or 8 games he played last year in Houston. He was on track to go over 1,000 again before he got hurt. And I don't have the contract numbers in front of me, but a 1-year deal for a guy probably at the end of his prime, that could help immediately, probably made sense on paper, but I don't think anybody saw this coming.
Right.
Not to necessarily defend the Patriots, but this was a black eye, and it was a black eye because of a lack of judgment by Stephon Diggs.
Yeah, and I think the Patriots and the Steelers are similar in that, the Patriots way. And I brought up Randy Moss. Patriots don't have a lot of controversial players, if you will, on their rosters. They're sort of like the Steelers. We're going to get rid of you early before we keep you later. A lot of times that has to do with production, but it is what it is. But I just was, and they can't, to your point, they can't predict this is going to happen.
Right.
But I guess I was thinking at this point, production is. I didn't know to the extent of what they would do if they say, okay, we're going to release this guy, whatever the case may be, because the optics on this thing looks very bad for him and very bad for the organization.
Yeah, I agree. And as I said earlier, hopefully there's a lesson learned here, that he's on his best behavior moving forward, that he doesn't make a similar mistake. I mean, I would hope so. I think the average person would be intelligent enough to recognize that that's not a good look, that is a stain on the reputation, and would be willing to do whatever it takes to try to repair that reputation.
Talking with Nick Anastas here on the show. And Nick, overall with the Patriots, you and I talked again before the draft. their needs. Getting a better pass rush, certainly wide receiver. You want to increase the offensive line. You want to make sure you protect this young kid so he can go through his progressions and make plays. Obviously, you got a solid a running back and running game. But overall, what do you think coming out of the draft, going into these OTAs, summer coming, and then preseason? Did the Patriots address enough? And if not, where did they need to and should address at this point?
Well, they tried to address the O line. They bring in 2 veterans. I don't know how good they are at this point, frankly, in Garrett Bradbury and Moses, but they are veterans that I think that can help, at least optimistically, right away. And then that first draft pick that they took with Will Campbell seemed to make a lot of sense. You and I had talked about that ad nauseum throughout the spring. So if there's an upgrade up front, and again, that was the big thing. Now, again, the casual fan will say, well, they don't have the weapons. Despite bringing in Steph Diggs, despite bringing in Mac Hollins, who's a great guy on special teams and just a good locker room guy to have, a big-bodied wide receiver, I think can help teams. Their problem, I don't think, is receiver. The problem last year was up front.
Right.
They didn't have enough consistency in the ground game to balance anything that they were doing through the air. So, again, the big question was, did they do enough to address that offensive line? And, again, a top overall draft pick and 2 veteran linemen coming in. That means now you've got 3 new starters up front, 3 of the 5. So they should be at least different up front, if not better. And I think if they are better, that goes a long, long way towards turning that offense into a consistently productive unit.
I don't buy into a lot of coaches that you hear people saying, "Oh, with this coach, he's good for a win, maybe 2, just on his coaching ability." I would say that about Mike Tomlin, a John Harbaugh, a Jim Harbaugh, a Sean Payton, guys like that. That they're making lemons out of making lemonade out of lemons, and I don't see Vrabel as that, but I think he's a solid coach. Having said that, how far? I don't think you and I think they're a playoff team this year, but how far are they away from being a playoff team again?
Probably 2 years, or probably a year from now. This was a rebuild for sure. It's been a rebuild since Belichick left, before Belichick left even. But it finally seems like they're getting some traction. We didn't talk about the defense yet, but now's a good time to highlight the fact that they spent a lot of money, a lot of cap money on the defensive side of the ball, even before the draft occurred. Carlton Davis has a chance to really be a nice supplemental piece on the other side of Gonzalez, who's an excellent corner, as we know, and still getting better. So that should be a pretty good 1-2 punch, so to speak, on the perimeter defensively. They bring in Robert Spillane, who has exceeded expectations the last 2 years. He's been one of the tackling machines, to use that term, for the Raiders. I think he's a good fit in the, at one of the inside linebacker spots. They should funnel a lot of the action towards him. And as long as he's healthy.
And the Steelers should have never got rid of him. So, yeah, I agree.
And the Steelers didn't play him enough. He was more of a reserve special teams guy until he went to the Raiders and then blew up the last 2 years. So he deservingly got paid this offseason. And then up front, there's a number of new names, including Milton Williams. He's a guy you can move inside, you can move outside. Really came on strong last year, particularly in the playoffs. We saw what he did in the Super Bowl. He's still young. Harold Landry is, again, kind of a hybrid edge guy who's quietly been productive his entire career at Tennessee. He's not going to give you 17, 18 sacks, but he will give you northwards of 60, 70 tackles along with 10 or 11 sacks. He's a good guy to have in the fold. So they spent a lot of money defensively bringing in veteran free agents. That allowed them to focus, I think, a little bit more on the offensive side during the draft. So the offseason, as we know, is always a combination of cap money, what you can spend, how you do spend it, and then, of course, the draft, which can be a crapshoot, but can also help improve teams right away in a kind of younger league in the NFL. So on paper, it looks like they address their needs on both sides of the football. Now it's just a case where they're going to go out and compete against each other in August, solidify a lineup, and then we'll see if they can win 7 or 8 games and improve upon the 4 victories that they had the last 2 seasons each.
You know, Howard Landry, I think is a nice free agent pickup. Milton Williams, though, man, that dude is a stud. That is your best off-season pick right there, in my opinion. And the only thing is when you play in the Super Bowl and you want to get your bucket, right? Are you going to play as hard as you did when you were with the Eagles? I'll get to them in a second. But man, this dude is a beast, and I think he's going to make a huge difference on that defense. I really do. Along with Carlton Williams and Gonzalez on the outside, I think they on the corners they're going to be good for some years to come there as well. Speaking of the Eagles, I just want to quickly go to the NFC. Eagles lost a lot, but the core is still there. Are they still the team to beat in the NFC?
Yeah, they're the champs until further notice, in my point, especially the way they steamrolled teams in the playoffs. They did lose a few pieces, but I think the core is back. It starts with the quarterback and Jalen Hurts, who's the coolest customer I've seen in a long time.
Just mild mannered. You can't tell if he's happy or sad or up or down. He's just mild mannered.
Perennial poker face for sure. And in this day and age where it's me a lot of the time, it's refreshing to see a guy who's as even keeled as he is. So yeah, and again, we saw what he did last year when he's healthy. You want to call him a game manager or whatever, sure, but he does everything well. He can get outside the pocket. He's got a big arm. He's accurate. And more importantly, he's a leader who has now proven he can get it done. The key cog there is Barkley, obviously. Now, he played all 17 games last year, and we saw what he can do. But correct me if I'm wrong, he hadn't played a full season with the Giants.
Right.
So he has an injury history that people seem to forget because he was healthy last year. So can he be as productive, as consistent from a health perspective as he was in 2024 is the key, because they don't have much behind him now. Right. A.J. Dillon is older. He's slow.
Gainwell's gone.
Yeah, Gainwell is gone. Will Shipley is undersized. Former 4th-round pick going into year 2. He may be called upon to play a bigger role this year, but he's certainly unproven is the point. So a lot rests on Barkley and keeping Barkley healthy. The O-line is the same. The weaponry is the same on the perimeter. So I expect the Eagles offense to be just fine. And then defensively, they've got one of the best linebacker cores in the league. And they only added to it with a 1st-round pick in Jahad Campbell. Nakobe Dean coming back healthy should be an improvement whenever that is. They lost Oren Burks, who was a good complementary piece. He went over to Cincinnati, but besides that, the starting unit, we talked about Williams. That's a loss as well, but they had depth up front to begin with. And then, that secondary is probably the most susceptible of the 3 levels, the most unproven. So if they're going to get beat, it's probably through the air. But to answer your original question, there's no real reason for me not to believe that the Eagles are once again the class of the NFC, if not the class of the league.
Is Washington and Daniels going to repeat what they did, the kind of magical season they had, in particular with him, the best rookie performance at quarterback in the history of the game with this kid. First guy in the film room, last guy off the field type of guy. Just feed me, feed me, feed me. What do you think of Washington and essentially with him, their sophomore year with him?
Well, we talked about this earlier. There's always the risk of a sophomore slump, so to speak. I'm with you. I don't see it. I think again he's a student of the game. He's played at the big level, not just in the NFL, going to the NFC Championship, but in college as well under that big spotlight. He seems like the real deal. They've got a good run game behind him. They've got a pretty good O-line. Deebo Samuel, if he's healthy, becomes a difference maker in the pass game. A guy you can move around, you can involve him in the run game, as we know San Francisco did as well. Terry McLaurin is underrated at the wide receiver spot. He's quietly put up numerous top 10, if not top 5 productive seasons there.
And he's up there with Chase and all these other guys. They better pay this guy. They better pay him.
Yeah, it's in their best interest to keep him there for sure, because I think there's a drop off in terms of talent in that wide receiver room underneath him. He is the clear go-to guy, the number one option, the alpha dog, however you want to phrase it. So it is important to keep him in the fold. And then defensively, they do look a little bit different. They're projected to have 4 new starters, all of them coming in via free agency, including former Patriot Jonathan Jones, who was pretty good up here. Javon Kinlaw is a veteran who may help them, at least from a depth perspective up front. Dietrich Weiss is another former Patriot who is, again, pretty good. The ageless wonder, Bobby Wagner, still productive, maybe not putting up 160 tackles a year like he was doing in his prime, but he's still 120, 125 guy and in the clear-cut leader of that defense, a future Hall of Famer. So, yeah, they've got pieces. I think they overachieved a little bit last year. I still have some questions about Dan Quinn. That may just be me, but he hasn't quite earned my trust yet. Although, again, he was a Coach of the Year candidate last year and did a terrific job. But, still blowing a 25-point lead in the second half of a Super Bowl still rubs me the wrong way.
As a defensive guy, really like banking on that. I agree with you.
Yeah, so I think they're a playoff team. They're in the hunt. Are they a Final Four team, an NFC contender? I'm not sure, but I think to answer your question, Daniels probably does improve, and Washington is once again competitive.
Yeah, I think they're a little bit better. Well, maybe even a lot better than Cincinnati, but I think essentially they added pieces and they're gonna look different, as you said, on defense. But I think that side of the ball is going to be their Achilles heel. They're going to have to definitely put up the numbers with this kid. And defense is it's a copycat league, and defense will catch up. So we'll see what he does. He's a smart kid though, and he makes smart decisions. One of the team in the NFC East, that be the Dallas Cowgirls, and Dak's supposed to be healthy. They got CD Lamb locked up. They bring in Pickens. Do they make the playoffs? Do they sign Micah Parsons? Is he going to be the highest defensive player in the league?
I think they do get a deal done with Parsons. We'll see what those final contract numbers look like, but yeah, it's going to be in the ballpark. I like the Pickens move. My big question is Dak. He's been so good for so long, but he's older now. He's got a little bit of an injury history at this point. He doesn't have that dominant ground game behind him that he did when he was successful. So I'm just not sure about Dallas. Frankly, I think they're probably in the same boat. Maybe not quite the same boat, but similar to the Patriots. If they win, 7 or 8 games, that's probably about right, in my opinion. And we know that's not going to sit well with Jerry down there. So at some point, I'm not saying this year or not, they're going to have to make a decision on Dak because, in my opinion, the best may be behind him.
And for me with Dallas, they still lighten the pants. That front seven, I don't think they've done it. I know they drafted the big kid on the line, but they still, if they get blown off the ball, I mean, again, it's another team where they're gonna have to, if they're gonna win games, they're gonna have to use those two great wideouts. Hopefully, the running game is good to outscore guys, because that front seven is still a question mark. They get bullied off the ball. And even Micah Parsons, the same thing like with Cincinnati with Hendrickson. You got one great player, but what are you going to do? I like what they have as safety and corner, of course, but in that front seven, are you going to be bullied again? That's going to be their biggest issue to me, Nick.
Yeah, I agree with that. Um, opposite Parsons, they've got Fowler, who's a veteran, but seems like he's kind of underperformed everywhere he's been. He was a big hype prospect coming in years ago in the first round, but has never become the star that he was supposed to be. Whether those expectations were too high or unfair or whatever, I'm just not sure that was the answer up front, and that's really the only veteran they brought in. Kenneth Murray has been okay, historically. Had some good years with Tennessee, but he's not a star either, so to speak. They did spend some mid-draft capital on the defensive side of the ball. As you mentioned, they brought in a second rounder. I hope I'm pronouncing this right, but Aziraku is a second rounder there and should be in that rotation on the edge along with the two veterans that we mentioned. Damarian Overshawn is a third rounder they brought in a few years ago that has never quite panned out and is still banged up. So, if some of these veterans are healthy, Jack Sanborn's another guy, again, solid, kind of under the radar in Tennessee. If they can get the most out of these veterans, keep them healthy, then maybe that helps with that front seven. But you're right. They were getting gashed repeatedly last year. And at least on paper, it doesn't appear like they did enough to address that.
Going around the divisions real quick and go to the NFC West. The Rams obviously made the playoffs, won the division. I think Sean McVay is the best coach in that division. 49ers have a better schedule in terms of strength of schedule, a weak schedule because of the games they lost and the injuries and all of the things they had. But the Rams, to me, they lose Cooper Kupp. They bring in a Aaron Rodgers favorite to replace him, and they got a young, active, fast defense. So who do you think wins that division?
Well, first of all, let's talk about the Niners for at least from the schedule perspective. I do not put a whole lot of stock into preseason strength of schedules. I just don't, because there's so much turnover year in and year out that it's hard to predict exactly where teams are going to be. Even week 1, never mind week 17. I mean, take Washington, for example. That's a team that won 4 games. They win 12. Nobody thought they were going to be any good.
Right.
So to me, the Niners have got an easier path. That remains to be seen. That being said, San Francisco has way more problems roster-wise than the Rams do. So I think it's the Rams kind of by default. I think Adams is probably an upgrade over a banged-up Cooper Kupp. And that pass game should be pretty formidable, if not one of the better passing units in the league. As long as Stafford continues to he's one tough SOB.
He really is. He really is.
Pittsburgh,
Oh my God. You don't know how bad I wanted the Steelers to give up the stars and the moon to get him in there.
Yeah, that's all said. But at some point, the rubber hits the road. At some point, there is going to be an injury with him, in my opinion. Given his age, given that he's played banged up his entire career, at some point, the other side of the scale weighs in, so to speak. So it may be a race against the clock there. But let's again presume that he's healthy once again. He's able to stay in the game and continue to produce on a weekly basis. Then yeah, they're going to be definitely formidable on offense. I like the young running back they brought in as well. Another SEC guy, a 4th-round pick, strong, sturdy, fast. That's Jarquez Hunter. Gives them a little bit of a different look to go with those 2 smaller backs that they already had in-house in Kyron Williams and year 2 with Blake Corum. Right. So if that run game improves to go with that pass game, they're going to be very tough to outshoot, so to speak. And we haven't even talked about the defense, as you said. That unit largely stays intact. They didn't spend a whole lot of draft capital there, a couple mid-round picks for depth reasons at the second level. But that starting unit is basically the same. And you've got a blossoming star on the edge in Jared Verse, who was outstanding last year, and I think is only going to get better. He had a lot of pressures, not necessarily a whole lot of sacks. I think those pressures turn into sacks in year 2, and that gives them another dynamic. So, in my opinion, yes, the Rams are the favorite in the NFC West.
NFC North is I think if the AFC West is not the best because you could potentially get 3 teams out of the playoff, I think the NFC North could be that with Detroit, Minnesota. Chicago could even be better, and you could talk about that. But J.J. McCarthy, first full year at quarterback in Minnesota. You see with Jared Goff, this Detroit defense was decimated. They get all their starters back. Who wins that division?
Well, Detroit's got a lot of question marks because Ben Johnson left town. So and so did Aaron Glenn. So 2 new coordinators under Dan Campbell. That's an automatic question mark. Whether or not they take a step back or not remains to be seen. But when there's that kind of a change, that's an attention grabber for sure. That being said, they play indoors, which is big in that division. That allows that offense to be as dynamic as it's been. And Jared Goff, still in his prime, I think produces again this season, with or without Ben Johnson. The defense, talk about not addressing the defense. I mean, they bring in Tyleik Williams in the first round, depth up front, okay, but then they kind of left it alone. They didn't take another defensive guy in the draft till round 6, which surprised me a little bit. That secondary, they signed DJ Reed, who is a good player and underrated. Had a good year with the Jets last year, but that's just a plug and play for the departure of Carlton Davis, who went to New England, as we talked about. So, how much did they improve defensively? How much did they improve, particularly in the secondary, remains to be seen, because on paper it looks like they didn't do enough to address it. That being said, Minnesota's got their own set of question marks. They overachieved last year. That offensive line was exposed in the playoffs when they gave up 9 sacks. They did spend a first rounder on a guard to bring in Donovan Jackson. They signed Ryan Kelly and Will Fries from Indiana. So again, you've got 3 new starters up front. Question marks there, not to mention J.J. McCarthy has never taken a snap in the NFL, and we're just supposed to expect that he's going to step in and produce right away. I think that may be a mistake to assume that. And then meanwhile, you've got Green Bay, who we haven't even talked about yet, but they just quietly get it done year in and year out, no matter who's there, no matter who's on the sidelines. That's one of the more consistent franchises in the league, in my opinion, and they are going to be in the hunt again based on that run game with Jeremy Jacobs. They've got a number of guys who on paper are set to produce in the receiving game. Love was MIA at times last year. He has got to be more consistent if they're going to have sustained success. Again, still on the younger side and should still be improving, but he does have his own set of limitations.
And I was going to say, he's had injuries, but is he a put up or shut up guy?
He may
Does
be.
he have to have a successful year to keep his job?
Yeah, I would think so. I
Yeah.
think if they miss the playoffs, he's in trouble, to a degree anyway. At least they take a hard look at him, I believe. He was the toast of the town when he took over the starting spot and had success right away. But as we talked about, kind of that sophomore slump, so to speak, I think bit him a little bit last year. And then defensively, they've got players on all three levels, especially at linebacker, one of the deeper cores. The secondary, probably the weakest group of the three. So again, if you're going to beat the Packers, it's probably through the air.
And Alexander's probably not coming back if I'm not understanding.
Right, but again, he hasn't been as productive as he was in his prime anyway. So I'm not sure that's a huge loss. And then finally, Chicago. They surprised me a little bit by not taking a tackle with that 10th overall spot. They elected to go instead with a receiving tight end, who's very young, by the way, only 21 years old. The kid out of Michigan, Colston Loveland. He has a chance to be a dynamic playmaker in the pass game, but he's not much of a blocking tight end. And, they tried to address some of those holes up front, and we'll see. Jonah Jackson, productive. Joe Thuney, as we talked about with the Chiefs, up and down. They bring in a guy at center, Drew Dahlman, from a pretty good Atlanta unit from last year. So, again, they've got 3 new starters, plus 2 new rookies slated to start in the receiving game in the aforementioned Loveland, and a third-round pick in Luther Burden, who could be a difference maker because he is that good athletically. Little immature, perhaps, still on the young side, but if he's a hit, he's going to be a big hit, in my opinion, for Chicago. And then defensively, a couple of veterans up front, but the back half looks pretty much the same. They've got one of the stronger secondaries, one of the best safety duos in the league. So this is one of the more interesting divisions. I would say Detroit is still the favorite by default, but it wouldn't surprise me if any one of those 4 teams either took a step up or a step back this season.
Wow. I just to find out with the Bears, Caleb Williams is not him and his father have not done the best things. Okay, I don't mind you writing a book, but why would you write the book in the midst of the fact that people are expecting, the expectations are high, you got weapons, they try to improve the offensive line, running game, defenses, Sweat and all those guys, right? But you not only write the book, but then you in the book you say, I don't want to be in Chicago. I want to pull an Eli Manning. I want to pull something up. I don't want to be a Bear. On top of the fact that you got sacked 68 times, you made some some controversial decisions in the passing game. Having said that, he was sacked 68 times. Who has more pressure? Ben Johnson, who everybody seems to be thinking he's the savior of this franchise, or Khalid Williams?
I think they're probably married now, attached at the hip. They both have to have success in order to stay in town. And this is going to take more than a year to play out. It should anyway. They should give a little bit more of a grace period. But in today's NFL, the leash, so to speak, is extremely short. So I think there's an equal amount of pressure for both to perform. And you're right about Williams. Anytime you're throwing shade, so to speak, at the organization you're currently employed by is not a good move, in my opinion. Plus, I'm not sure that he has that kind of capital, frankly.
Right.
Teams are not going to go out of their way to go get this kid unless he can produce. So the timing was wrong. The whole idea of again, bad mouthing your employer is never a good idea, not just in the NFL, but in life in general, for any job, in my opinion. Keep those personal thoughts personal is my opinion there. So, As far as Johnson goes, he's just the latest in the quote unquote hot coordinator craze. Um, and that doesn't always translate to success once the head coaching door opens. Now, not to say that I don't think he's going to succeed. I don't know, but we've seen this movie before, to use an LA Batchelor phrase, in
Right.
which a hot coordinator is the toast of the town, comes into a new team and does not find it nearly as easy because it's a different set of responsibilities. So can he handle the new role as head coach as effectively as he did as offensive coordinator? If he does, and the Bears become relevant for the first time in almost 40 years, then all the power to you. But I think, to answer your question, the head coach and the quarterback are typically linked. And in this case, they're definitely linked moving forward.
Talking with Nick Anastas here on the Batchelor News Report. Nick, final in terms of divisions, it's the Who Cares division, it seems like, and that is the NFC South. Atlanta did well, bench Kirk Cousins for a rookie quarterback. Everybody who, by the way, said, well, why are they drafting a quarterback when they got Kirk Cousins? Well, have you ever watched the NFL with Kirk Cousins, Mr. Happy Feet, Mr. Pick Six waiting to happen? So I wasn't surprised. It's Tampa's to lose. They seem more solid. They seem to just replenish. They seem to know what veterans to keep around, the Mike Evans of the world. About that division that you see?
I agree. It's Tampa's to lose. Although with a new offensive coordinator, that's a question mark. But Baker's in his prime right now and is coming off a career year. I don't see any real reason to doubt that. You can say what you want about Godwin, who's been banged up. You can say what you want about Evans, who, is an ageless wonder. But they've got pieces behind them as well, including the kid from Ohio State, who they just spent a first rounder on. That's a looking forward type of pick, but also a pick I think that can help out of the slot right away. They're similar to Washington, I think, in terms of, they can outshoot people, but that defense needs a little bit of work.
Right.
And again, they didn't do much in the draft or free agency to change things up there. But
yeah, and that defense is getting old. You're right.
Right. So, can they put enough points up with a new coordinator to continue to win games? I think is the biggest question facing the Buccaneers. Atlanta, I saw that whole Kirk Cousins things coming, as did you, when they signed him and then drafted Penix. They spent a ton of money on Cousins. I think it was a 4-year deal.
Yeah.
For a guy who's 35 years old, I'm like, that doesn't make sense on paper, but it does make sense in the fact that the contracts aren't guaranteed. I figured the whole time that Cousins was going to be a placeholder, a 1-year stopgap for Penix to get ready. And I was high on Penix coming out of college, and I am still high on him. I think he's got a lot of physical tools that frankly, an older Kirk Cousins does not have. So
he's to me, Nick, he's a less athletic left-handed Michael Vick. He can throw the ball. And I'm with you. I was high on him at Washington, and I'm high on him in the NFL.
Yeah. I think the Falcons will be pretty good. Right around 500, maybe a little bit above. Certainly in the hunt in December, so to speak, in a weak conference. And then, the other two teams, you're not going to like this, LA. I know your son's a Saint fan, but I think New Orleans may be the worst team in the league. And, obviously I'm not going to sugarcoat that. They're a mess at quarterback. They've got an aging roster. They're not very good on either side of the ball. They've got a no-name head coach. I think it's going to be a long year for Saints fans, unfortunately. Agreed. And then Carolina, they showed some promise down the stretch. They were competitive. They won some games. They got production from Bryce Young, an undersized quarterback in year number 2. Can he pick up where he left off is the question there in Carolina. but I don't have too high expectations for the Panthers either. I think 7 or 8 wins is probably their ceiling.
I agree with you. 5 for the Saints, probably 7 for the Panthers, which is really uh, blowing when you look at where the Panthers were a few years ago and the Saints a few years ago, and now Saints will probably be at the bottom of that division. Real quick, switching to the NBA, obviously you have one of the best players in the league out for Boston, seemingly for most of the year. Uh, and everybody is counting Boston out. Everybody's talking about it. The Knicks are going to get, Giannis, or they're going to get Kevin Durant, or they fired Thibodeau. They get to the conference finals the first time in a quarter century, and all these things. You look at what Indiana's doing. Certainly, Cleveland is loaded. I can't, as much as I'm a Sixer fan, so I'm not a Celtic fan, but as a Celtic, if I'm a Celtic fan, I'm like, wait a minute now. You got Brown, you got some talent coming off the bench, you got Porzingis. I mean, this team, they're acting as though, although again, you have one of the elite players hurt. This team is just not him. Like you look at this team, they won the title with 1A and 1B, and they were good with 1A and 1B this year. So I'm not ready to write the Celtics off as a 6 seed next year going into the playoffs. I still think they're in the top 4 in the Eastern Conference.
So do I. And you highlighted everything I was about to say. The only thing I will add is that they do need to get a little bit more athletic off the bench,
right?
And they need to improve on that interior defense,
and a little bit more depth too. If anything, they just need the bench. I agree with you.
Right. So I think it's an important off season from that perspective. Are they going to make a big splash, bring in a big name? I doubt it. But again, can they improve on the margins? Can they? Again, replace Al Horford. I don't know if he's coming back or not. I tend to doubt it. And again, he should be celebrated for a great career. Playing 15 plus years in the league. Right. But he was a liability, as we've talked about. Luke Cornett is just not. He's a big body. He can block some shots, but he's not.
He looked lost a lot of times when he was in the game.
And at 29, he's not going to improve. So they need depth behind Porzingis. And again, Porzingis himself is the biggest question mark because of his history of lower body injuries. So Celtics probably don't win 61 games. I don't think anyone's calling for that. 61 was the number they won this year. But if they win 52, 54, that's good enough for a home game in the first round. And then you're getting, or hopefully getting, Tatum back in time for that postseason run. So, to say that they are not in the hunt in the East is just delusional.
Right. Especially when we saw the collapse of Cleveland yet again.
Right.
Especially when you see a guy like Tyrese Halliburton, who I love, his inconsistencies, and he's the coach on the court. Especially when the Knicks don't know what they're doing. To me, I understand the accountability and the not playing a lot of guys and Thibodeau, but he did get you to the conference final. I think there's a lot more questions in the East and some of these teams than just saying that, okay, if he's not there, that they're going to drop to like a 6th or a 7th seed. I don't see that at all with the Celtics. Final question in baseball, we seen Roman Anthony, who by all accounts is not just the number 1 prospect for the Red Sox, but number 1 prospect in all of baseball, arguably, right? Coming up, got the era 0 for 4 in his first game, gets to 2 RBIs, helps them win the second game. What's the ceiling for him? And what are they going to do with Devers and that whole situation? They got too many outfielders, in my opinion. they have the situation where if you keep Raphael in the lineup, you're going to get the offense, but you're going to give up some defense, and it seems as though that's maybe where they want to go. Pitching wise, they have been kind of inconsistent. So what's with this team? Obviously, the Orioles are in the basement. The Red Sox are right there. They won 2 out of 3 against my Yankees, but of course, they lose the opening game to the Rays and they win. What's the ceiling with this kid and with this team?
Well, let's start with his credentials. He's 21 years old, second rounder in 22, was ranked as the second highest prospect in the organization. Frankly, I would like to see him complete another year at the minors. There's no reason to rush, in my opinion, given, as you said, the amount of outfielders already on board with the big league ball club. So it may be a case of, okay, let's bring him up, see what he's got, and then bring him back down. That may be in the cards. He's got plenty of service time to go, but to me, it seems like it's a little premature. But what do I know? In terms of
he's good enough to go up and down too, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. So it wouldn't surprise me if later this summer he goes back down, comes back up, maybe when the rosters expand to 40, something like that. To address this team overall troubles, it's that rotation and the fact that they haven't been consistently healthy. Garrett Crochet has been excellent. He seems to have limited the mistakes that haunted him in Chicago. He's a strikeout machine with stuff. So I think that was a pretty good move to bring him in the offseason as the head of this rotation. But again, there's too much inconsistency from a production standpoint and a health standpoint behind him. So until that they can get, Walker Buehler back and fully healthy, bring in Tanner Hoke's another guy, homegrown, Cutter Crawford. Those guys are out right now on the injured list. If at some point, again, this rotation can get healthy and solidify itself, then that goes a long way towards helping this ball club overall, because the offense has been there. As much as the distraction with the third base situation has been, they're still producing up and down the lineup. Top 7 in all 6 offensive categories, which is pretty good. And the bullpen has been pretty good, not great, but above average. It's really been that rotation that has haunted them, and until that they can get healthy, they're going to continue to be up and down, flirting with 500.
But what are they going to do at first and third? I think Devers could be a very distraction. I mean, the case scenario, he grounded out at first, didn't look like he ran hard. You're looking at the coaching staff and manager, like, are you hurt? It seemed like he kind of poo-hooed. He knew he was going to be out and didn't run hard. Next at bat, he hits a home run. It seems like he could be a distraction. Can you see any scenario where Bergman or him are traded for pitchers or anything like that, or are they just going to ride this thing through?
I think they'll ride it through at least till the end of the year. I don't see a move coming before next offseason, if at all. It is kind of unfortunate that it's become such a distraction that we're still talking about it here in June, frankly.
Right.
The longer this thing remains a quote unquote issue, the more detrimental it becomes. So that being said, I don't see them making that kind of a move in season. They spent a lot of money on both of them with the idea that they can coincide and be productive for years to come. I still think that's the goal.
Final question, though. If they make a run, right, to the playoffs, they're 9 games out or whatever it is now, whatever, and they can get a wild card or whatever. If they make a run, will that, let me see if I say it right, will that put pressure on them to make a trade to tone down the distraction, or definitely double down and keep them because they make a run?
I would tend to go with the latter. If they have success, then that's a good problem to have, so to speak. If not, well, then it becomes a problem that does need to be addressed. You know, winning cures a lot of ills. You know, not just in sports, but in life. So if things are going well, I tend to think that this thing ultimately gets put to bed. And again, I'm not sure how big of a distraction this is in the clubhouse or how big it is just amongst the media, which could be the case as well. So we'll see. I think, again, winning cures, as I said, a lot of ills. So if they do go on a run, I tend to think that they keep it intact.
Yeah, they'll Boston has a history of great bats and scoring a lot of runs. So
Right.
if they do make a run, yeah, they want to definitely keep him. And either one of those guys, God forbid, if they either one of those guys gets traded, you're gonna get a lot, and certainly they would want pitching in return. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Nick, extended time as always, my friend. We love you here. We appreciate you. I know you got a lot of other shows to do, and you're covering all the games. Thank you so much for the extended time, man. And I hopefully, Lord willing, I'm trying to go to Puerto Rico for my birthday. Hopefully, I'll see you and talk to you when I get back. But thanks for the extended time today.
I appreciate you working around my schedule, LA. It's always a pleasure. And let me know about the Puerto Rico trip. I'll steer you in the right direction for sure.
Absolutely. Matter of fact, I'm going to take you up on that because I was going to ask you. I said, Nick knows about the hotels and the resorts. I need to ask him that off air. So I'm definitely going to reach out to you in a few.
That sounds like a plan, LA. I
Thanks,
appreciate
Nick.
it.
Appreciate you, bro. All right.
All right, man. Bye
All
bye.
right. Oh, Nick Anastas is one of those guys that just knows his stuff. He covers all the sports. We didn't even get into hockey and what he thought about the Panthers and the Edmonton Oilers and other topics, but he stayed on as long as he did. Certainly appreciate him covering area sports in the New England and New Hampshire areas there, as he does on a regular basis. This is the Batchelor News Report. Stay tuned.